The debate on the war in Ukraine is still raging on. The impact of the conflict has led to concerns around food insecurity and the high cost of living. As NATO prepares for its summit next month, there are views on the role of NATO in this war. For more on this, we are now joined by our international news editor, Sophie Mokoena. Thank you so much for making time for us. A special day yesterday with the ANC calling for this debate and various voices being heard there, including from the ambassadors.
Yes, indeed, quite a very heated debate around the war in Ukraine and the relationship, particularly between Russia and Ukraine, including how the world should conduct itself during this crisis. But for me, I think the critical issue is ahead of the NATO summit meeting next month or next week. The debate has shifted to the role of NATO. And perhaps let's take a listen at what the ambassador of Russia had to say about NATO being responsible for all these changes.
I do not think that in the modern world there is a place for neutrality. For a very simple reason. The tendency that was initiated by George Bush Jr., who said some 20 years ago that either you are with us or you are against us. And that was said, that was applicable to the situation of fighting terrorism. But since then, this slogan has been spread to other areas of human activities, of international relations. And the very latest example of this logic, this algorithm brought to the apogee is the 11th package of sanctions against Russia, which is basically aimed not at Russia, but at those who do not comply with the sanctions imposed against Russia. So you cannot remain neutral.
You cannot remain neutral, but the ambassador of Norway, even though the ambassador of Ukraine was not there, was quick to hit back. Let's take a listen at what the ambassador of Norway had to say.
The problem for Russia is not really NATO. The problem is democracy. They don't have democracy inside the country because the leadership don't allow it. If you take a white paper like this and walk on the red square and say peace, you will be put in jail. No freedom, no democracy. But they also want to prevent other countries in the neighborhood from having freedom and democracy. NATO never had a plan to expand. But as countries became independent after the fall of the Soviet Union, they want to keep their independence. They want to stay free. They want self-determination. Just like you wanted, just like Norway wanted during the Second World War. That's the principle which is at stake. And they feel threatened, and they apply for NATO membership, because that can give them certainty.
Yeah, the question around the expansion of NATO, of course, especially moving further east. When I was speaking to the ambassador of Ukraine to South Africa, she said that it's still on the table. They still want to become a member of. NATO, but of course the difficulty is that they're already in a conflict, so they won't be getting that membership as it stands currently.
Yes, many people are saying perhaps post-war, then NATO can admit Ukraine to be a member, but clearly it looks like Sweden. There's going to be positive news next week. But also when you look at this issue, perhaps let's take a listen at what an analyst or a professor or a scholar from South Africa, Chris Landsberg, had to say about this war.
I'm willing to say in front of the Russian ambassador, the miscalculation probably was that the war wouldn't last that long, but now that it's lasted that long, the project is no longer just to restore non-alignment, the sovereignty of Ukraine. It has now become regime change in Russia and even the westernization of Russia. And it will not end in Russia.
Well, regime change. We know what happened with the head of the Wagner Group, Prigozhin. But now also it is what happens next, considering also the 10-point plan that was produced by the African heads of state as well as representatives of government.
Well, indeed, both South Africa and the ANC are saying they are going to soldier ahead with this mission, and also that they support the mission. Both the Norwegian ambassador and the Russian ambassador also are in support of all the efforts to bring peace in that region. Let's take a listen at what the Secretary General of the ANC had to say about this issue.
The ANC will reiterate the message conveyed to Russia and Ukraine by the African leaders that the war must be ended as a matter of urgency. In this regard, we call on all other countries to desist from fueling the conflict through military support, either to Ukraine or to Russia.
Well, but earlier on, Sophie, we were actually speaking there. Naledi was telling us about the media advisory that has come out for the accreditation for the BRICS summit. So now we know that the summit will be going ahead. But then it's all of the other meetings that are going to be taking place ahead of the summit.
Yes, we are told that at the AU summit, mid-July, you know, every year you have a meeting in January and July, the heads of state and government are going to invite President Zelensky, if all goes well, to address them. This will be the first time he's given a platform to address all heads of state and government in this kind of a forum. It might be not in person, but rather virtual. But this is an opportunity to state his case. On the other hand, heads of state and government are going to St. Petersburg, end of July, the Russia-Africa summit, where they are going to engage President Putin. And President Putin will have an audience with majority of leaders who will be there at this summit. Let's take a listen at what the head of diplomacy, Clayson Minyela, had to say about a way forward in terms of the mission of AU, African heads of state, in Ukraine and in Russia.
The expectation is that these 7 heads of state who are part of the Africa Peace Mission will utilize that occasion to continue to engage, because peace building and peacemaking is not an event, but a process. We have started the process as South Africa, and we are intentional in continuing with this process, because we think the war must end because of the implications that everybody has spoken about. President Zelensky has proposed the idea of a Ukraine-Africa engagement as well. Of course, one of the options would be that in the mid-year summit of the African Union, he may be invited to come and address the African Union. That's one of the options that's being explored. The 7 heads of state have agreed in principle that there must be a platform for Ukraine to also engage with the continent in the manner that Russia is going to engage with the continent as part of the Russia-Africa summit.
And very important, after that African Union summit and the meeting of the heads of state will be the closing remarks that are made at the end of the day, if indeed Zelensky does address them.
Yes, indeed. But I think this speaks to the fact that much as people are critical of the African heads of state and government peace mission, it looks like they've created or paved way for broader engagement. And also the minister, Lindiwe Zulu, who was there in her capacity as an ANC subcommittee member of ANC International Relations, said that at least now there's a way to engage these two people. Now what you have to do is to ensure that your NATO, your AU, your UN, your European Union member countries, your BRICS member countries, your China, the powerful nations, United States of America, they all pull their heads together to ensure that there's a better way of ensuring that very soon the two leaders can engage each other, whether virtual or in person. But it has paved way for broader discussions.
Thank you so much for your time, Sophie Mokoena, the SABC International News Editor.